a war that began with the idea of eliminating Iran as a nuclear threat and that its regime would be brought to an end has now become an economic enrichment device for the Iranian regime, a humiliation for the United States.
That was John Podhoretz, editor of the neoconservative Commentary magazine and a huge advocate of the Iran war. So when people say that the U.S. lost the war and the Iranians won it, you don't have to take the word of a liberal East Coast mamby-pamby journalist like me. You can just take the word of John Podhoretz. I'm Borzou Deragahi. I'm the founder of Badlands. It's a newsletter and podcast. You can subscribe at Borzou, BORZOU.substack.com. I'm also available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube, where I hope to get some more followers so that I can eventually monetize that account. So if you can find me on YouTube and hit the like button or the subscribe button, that would be awesome. So like many other people, I think I've been taking a drink this week. I've been drinking, I call this drink Neocon tears. And that's what you have basically because of this memorandum of understanding that the Iranians and the Americans signed. And basically a lot of people are freaking out. A lot of advocates of the war, a very tiny sliver of the US electorate, mostly, not totally, connected to Israel, supportive of Israel. They're outraged by this memorandum of understanding. And hey, you know what? It's Donald Trump. Next week, they can start a war again. Donald Trump can rip up the memorandum of understanding as he ripped up the 2015 nuclear deal and go back to war again. But this week, we can enjoy some neocon tears. So I've been spending a lot of time just this week listening to these people rant and rave. It's become a kind of entertainment for me and others who are just watching these people have meltdowns on social media, talking about how this memorandum of understanding that I described in detail on Tuesday, and it turns out that I had a pretty correct version of that memorandum of understanding, the 14-point plan. It was pretty accurate. You've had the comparisons to Versailles, because apparently the deal was signed in Versailles, and they're likening it to the 1919 armistice between Germany and the Allied powers that the Germans later called the stab in the back, and that's what the Israelis are calling it, Israelis and their shills in the United States. It's really kind of pathetic to watch. Donald Trump himself helpfully explained why he had to sign this peace deal, this memorandum of understanding, why he had to extricate the U.S. from the war. And as me and others have saying, it was just a simple matter of math. Many people have been explaining this. I'm not taking any special credit for this. Iran just had more staying power. They could have waited the U.S. out for months and months and months, perhaps even years. But in the case of the U.S., as Donald Trump helpfully explained, it was 4 weeks left before the strategic reserves were to run out in the U.S. And then the price of oil would start hiking really higher. You'd start paying $10 a gallon for gasoline instead of $4 or $5 or $6, as some people are paying even now. The Trump administration needs to bring down the price of gas. It was one of his campaign promises, and it's also hurting his fellow Republicans. What's kind of interesting is none of that matters. All of the Donald Trump charm has drained away for some of these people. Like, for example, this guy, John Podhoretz, he became famous last year when he said, he had a very kind of poignant and provocative tweet. He wrote, "I don't care if Donald Trump calls Jewish people a Shylock. He bombed Iran. And so he's forgiven for being even like this kind of gutter anti-Semitism. He'd be forgiven for that just because he bombed Iran. He was referring to the 12-day war. But let's hear what he says about Donald Trump now.
There is nothing that he said in 2015 about the JCPOA that does not apply in 2026 to this deal that he is now making. It is as though he was predicting his own failure, foolishness, fecklessness, and I can't think of another F word to add to that. Trump literally said we had to do this to open the Strait of Hormuz. That's what he said. And there will be a global recession if we don't do it. So it's his fault. His fault that the Strait of Hormuz was closed, his fault that the global recession was coming, maybe he had to fix it. So maybe he should now apologize to the world for having caused this trouble.
The level of privilege these people have is extraordinary. I mean, the sense of entitlement and the inability they have to separate U.S. interests and Israeli interests. Here's another soundbite from John Podhoretz. He basically excused every single other one of Donald Trump's transgressions and his violation of international norms and laws. And he says that when you're in a fight with another country, the rules just dictate that you don't stab your partner in the back, as if Donald Trump has not stabbed every single person that he's been in a relationship with, every single country, every single company that he's been in a partnership with, as if he hasn't stabbed everyone in the back.
We went to war with Israel. Israel was a partner in this war. He is not under what set of understandings of how relationships between nations work does one party in a sort of two-party war unilaterally decide what the sovereign nation that it is allied with must do because he wants to grease up his body and weasel out of the trap that he has gotten himself into. It's unmanly.
What's kind of interesting is that the administration is having none of it, and there's been some extraordinary pushback. J.D. Vance has been out on the circuit. He's been talking to the podcasters. He's been on the networks, basically selling this deal. It seems to be his job. He's the public face of it. But in one extraordinary moment on Thursday, he let loose a truth bomb that was just extraordinary. I've never heard a U.S. official, a senior U.S. official, talk this way about Israel. And just basically not only highlighting the level of Israel's international isolation and the amount of hatred much of the world has for Israel, but also pointing out and underscoring just how dependent Israel is on U.S. security and security guarantees and missiles for its security and prosperity in just one soundbite that's like a minute long.
What I will say, and this does bother me, is that you've seen people within Bibi's cabinet who have come out and attacked the deal and in some ways very personally attacked the President of the United States. And I guess my message to them would be twofold. Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. And the second message I would give to some of those cabinet members, Bibi, to his credit, has not gone down this path, but to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the President of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the President of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Thank you all.
I had a great interview today with NewsX World of India, in which we discussed this memorandum of understanding and all different aspects of it, including the significance for Lebanon, how Lebanon plays into it, and also what could happen in the following 60 days as the U.S. and Iran sit down for real negotiations and try to hammer out a more durable deal.
This memorandum of understanding, a lot of people are looking at it bewildered, confused, and trying to find the point in which any of the United States' planned aims have been successfully achieved in this conflict. Out of those aims which Donald Trump had going into this war, what exactly has been achieved when looking at this memorandum of understanding?
Nothing. The U.S. lost the war, and the consequence of that loss, that strategic loss, is that the United States has to give concessions. Why does it have to give those concessions in order to get the Strait of Hormuz reopened? It turns out that this was a contest of wills and stamina, and it turns out that Iran had more stamina than the United States. As even Donald Trump acknowledged yesterday, he said that, look, we were a month away from depleting our entire strategic petroleum reserves. That would mean gasoline rising to $10 a gallon, $2.50 a liter. That would be unbearable for many Americans. That would mean the end of the summer travel season. It would also have meant continued pain and perhaps even cataclysmic economic failure for the economies of Southeast Asia and the subcontinent, as well as other parts of the Pacific Rim that were dependent on that oil and gas coming out of the Strait of Hormuz.
But what's your view in what actually changed in these negotiations? There was, and of course we've been following this closely, consistent reports of these maximalist demands by the Americans, whether it be the handing over of the Iranian nuclear materials directly over to the United States, whether it be a complete dismantling of the ballistic missile program. What changed? These issues have been pushed to the back of the negotiating table, and we're now seeing even a $500 billion investment in Tehran be involved in this. What was the catalyst for a change in direction?
Well, I think there was two things. One was the Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, and the other was the U.S. and Israeli inability to completely cripple Iran militarily. Iran had military successes up until the very end. As a matter of fact, there were some suggestions that during the kinetic phase of the war in March and early April, Iran was actually improving its targeting, improving its capabilities. Its missiles were becoming more precise, and it was becoming basically an unbearable cost for the United States. I mean, Donald Trump can LARP, can fake, can live action role play as if the United States is a country run by warriors and this warrior caste. But in reality, America is run by lawyers and accountants, and the lawyers and accountants said enough is enough.
And what about Donald Trump defending this? He, of course, needs to make this seem like a win for the Americans. How do you believe he intends to do so, and what kind of impact will this deal have on those midterm elections, those crucial midterm elections that are coming up in November?
You know, it actually might help him in the elections, because the portion of the U.S. electorate that are vehemently in favor of this war, that kind of pro-Israel sliver, is a very small, if vocal and well-funded group of people, whereas the Tucker Carlsons, Megyn Kellys, Candace Owenses, the Sean Ryans, those kind of right-wing bloggers and podcasters, those people represent far more people, and those people are with him on this. They are in favor of this peace deal, regardless of whether it gives Iran some concessions. I think we shouldn't exaggerate those concessions. That $300 billion that everyone is throwing around, it's just a pie in the sky. If you look carefully at the language, it's really referring to the creation of a development fund. I've been covering conflicts in the Middle East for 25 years. After every war, there is some kind of talk of a redevelopment fund. All sorts of big numbers were thrown around for Afghanistan, for Iraq, for Lebanon in 2006. That rarely comes through. These are just aspirational more than anything, and if anything does come through, it would more likely than not come from the private sector and not from the U.S. private sector.
So you've just said how long you've been covering this region for. What about the coalition that started this war in the first place? The Americans and the Israelis, of course, launched this conflict on the 28th of February. They did it together, but now they seem to be moving further apart. In all your years of covering this region, have we ever seen the American-Israeli relationship like how it is following the signing of this peace deal?
There was a lot of stress and tension between the U.S. and Israel when the United States signed the nuclear deal under President Barack Obama in 2015. There was a lot of vociferous criticism. Benjamin Netanyahu came to the American Congress. He addressed the Congress, and he created a lot of anger among Democrats because he was basically trying to feed the beast of the Republicans at that time and not really speaking to the Democrats that had supported Israel in the past. So I think that this is similar to that. Look, the Israelis don't want to see any kind of deal between the United States and Iran. They don't want any kind of relationship between the U.S. and Iran that's better than the relationship that Israel has with Iran. So they would prefer that if they're going to be hostile with Iran, the U.S. is hostile with Iran. And any kind of sign of rapprochement is worrying because they see Iran as some kind of existential threat, I think incorrectly. And I think there are some wise people in Israel who see the Palestinian question as more pressing. But Netanyahu has put Iran at the top of his agenda, and that has really colored Israeli politics for decades.
Donald Trump's stance seems to have changed on Lebanon too. We've seen his sudden disdain for Israeli war tactics in the comments made at the G7, him claiming that Israel blow up the buildings even when Hezbollah walk into them. He's also, of course, been very vocally angry with the operations of particularly the striking of these high-rise buildings in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Of course, the cessation of hostilities inside Lebanon is also a key point of that memorandum of understanding. How likely is it that we do see an actual end to conflict in Lebanon following this agreement?
Well, I think the conflict is cooling down some. There haven't been the horrific reports of bombings of apartment blocks in southern Beirut. The fighting seems to have simmered down even a little bit in the south of Lebanon. But I think that Israel is going to be very pushy about maintaining its presence in southern Lebanon at the very least. And I think that to some extent, Iran is okay with that. So long as it doesn't expand to the rest of the country. And I think that Hezbollah is fine with fighting Israel on its own turf in this particular way. They're seeing some battlefield successes, and Israel is getting hit hard. It's just that when they fire the airstrikes at apartment buildings, hitting the family members of Hezbollah, hitting neighbors and ordinary people, that really creates a lot of disturbance, and that really creates a lot of political tension in Lebanon. And that's what Iran doesn't want, and that's what Hezbollah doesn't want. So I think the fighting in the south will likely continue at a simmer, whereas the fighting in the city of Beirut and other cities may calm down. And
we now have 60 days, of course, for a final deal to be reached between Washington and Tehran. Of course, one has to remind oneself that this is just the start of that time period in which there are plans to get a solution to that issue of Iran's nuclear program. How do you see those negotiations going? And how can you compare them with the way in which the Americans were positioned in 2015 to how they are now?
Well, I think that the nuclear deal in 2015, it was done with a lot more professionalism. There was a lot more technical discussions involved. The precursors to those discussions went on for a year and a half in secret, and that gave the negotiators space to discuss sensitive issues without worries about press leaks and public pressure and so on. But I think the 60 days, on the one hand, they're an opportunity for Iran and the U.S. to get their act together and come up with a deal. But I think other parties in Washington and Israel will see those 60 days as an opportunity to sabotage the deal. And that will involve lobbying efforts in Washington. That will involve a media strategy, using media to condemn any kind of negotiation, any kind of deal. And that may also involve kinetic action, perhaps acts of sabotage by Israel in Iran. There's a long history of that. Or, as you mentioned earlier, more action and more kinetic action and violence in the Lebanon theater. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I'm Borzu Deragahi. The podcast is called Badlands. You can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where I'm just reached 100 followers, just 100 subscribers. If you could subscribe and help bring me up to like 500, I can start monetizing that account and making some money off of YouTube. Neocon tears.